Victor Halden was a name everyone in the world of classical music knew. He had played in the biggest concert halls, from New York to Paris, from Berlin to Tokyo. People paid hundreds of dollars just to hear him touch the piano keys. His fingers moved like magic, and his music could make people cry, smile, or sit in silence with wonder. But now all of that was gone. Victor had stopped playing. After his last tour, he returned to his large, quiet home in the countryside. It was a beautiful house, old but elegant, with high ceilings, tall windows, and a grand piano that sat in the center of the music room. That piano had once been the heart of the house. Music had filled the halls every morning and night. But now the piano was silent. No one touched it. Not even Victor. Why? Because he had lost her. His wife Anna had passed away just a few months before. She wasn't just his wife. She had been his partner on stage for over 20 years. She played the violin, and together they had created the most beautiful music. Audiences said their connection was something rare, not just in music, but in life. When Anna smiled on stage, Victor played with more passion. When she cried through her violin, Victor matched her sadness on the piano. They were one soul in two bodies, but now half of that soul was gone. Victor tried to play after the funeral. He sat at the piano, stared at the black and white keys, and placed his hands where they always rested. But his fingers didn't move. He felt cold, empty. He couldn't play even a single note. The silence was louder than any music he had ever played. After a few minutes, he stood up, closed the piano lid, and walked away. That was the last time he tried. Each day after that was the same. Victor woke up early, drank tea in the garden, and wandered around the house like a ghost. He didn't speak much. He didn't invite anyone over. He didn't even look at the piano room. He spent his time reading old music books or looking at photos of his past performances. Sometimes he would sit in the dark for hours, listening to old recordings of him and Anna, her laughter, her voice, her violin, all echoes from a life that felt like a dream now. The staff at the house didn't know what to say. The cook prepared meals, but Victor hardly ate. The gardener trimmed the roses, but Victor didn't stop to smell them anymore. And then there was Mei Lin, the maid. Mei was quiet and kind. She had only worked in the house for 6 months, starting just before Anna passed away. She didn't know much about Victor's past, but she could feel the sadness in the house. It sat in the air like dust on old shelves. She cleaned the rooms, did the laundry, and made sure the house stayed in order. But she noticed something others didn't. Every day when she cleaned the music room, she took a moment to stand near the piano. She didn't touch it, that would be rude. But she looked at the sheet music left behind. One piece always sat open, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. It was known to be one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. So many notes, so much emotion. She could hear it in her mind just by looking at the notes. No one knew this, but Mei used to play. Back in her small village in China, her uncle had an old, broken upright piano. She practiced on it every day as a child. Her dream was to be a pianist one day, but life had other plans. Her family needed money, so she left school, started working, and one day ended up far from home, cleaning the house of a famous musician who had no idea she once loved music, too. Now she watched Victor from a distance. She saw his pain, his silence. She wanted to help. But what could a maid say to a broken man who once moved the world with his music? And yet, something inside her felt a strange connection to him. They were both carrying something heavy. She had left her dream behind. He had lost his reason to keep dreaming. Neither of them had said a word to each other beyond good morning or thank you. But something was building in the silence, something that would soon change both of their lives. Forever. The rain tapped softly on the tall windows of the music room. Outside, the sky was gray, and inside the house, everything felt still. Victor sat in his usual chair, silent, lost in his thoughts. He had spent the morning doing nothing, just sitting and staring out at the empty garden. This was his life now. Quiet, slow, empty. But today was not like other days. As the storm grew stronger, Victor walked past the music room. His eyes stopped on the piano. Something pulled him closer. Maybe it was the sound of the rain. Maybe it was the memory of Anna playing beside him during storms just like this one. Whatever it was, he stepped into the room, and there, standing by the piano, was Mei. She didn't notice him at first. She was wiping the piano gently with a cloth, her fingers moving carefully around the keys. Her eyes weren't on the cloth. They were on the sheet music that still sat open on the stand. Victor had left it there months ago. He hadn't touched it since Anna died. He watched quietly. May wasn't just cleaning when she was reading the music. Her eyes followed the notes like someone who understood them. Victor cleared his throat and May jumped, quickly stepping back and bowing. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, nervous. "I was just cleaning." Victor looked at her for a moment, then asked in a calm voice, "You can read that?" May hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to be seen as proud either. "A little," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "That's Rachmaninoff. Not many can read it." "Can you play it?" She looked down. Her heart was beating fast. "I used to play," she whispered. Victor chuckled. It wasn't a kind laugh, more of a bitter one. "Everyone says that," he muttered. "Go on then. Let's hear it." May froze. She had never imagined this moment. Playing in front of someone like Victor Halden? Impossible. She wasn't ready. She hadn't touched a piano properly in years. But something about the way he spoke, tired, almost as if he didn't expect anything from her, gave her the courage to try. Slowly, she sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She took a deep breath. The room was quiet except for the sound of the rain and her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then she began to play. At first, the notes were soft, unsure. Her hands trembled. But then something shifted. Her body relaxed. Her eyes closed. And the music started to flow. Not perfectly. There were slips, missed key, but it didn't matter, because her playing had something else. It had feeling. Every note carried a piece of her story. The sorrow of leaving her family, the quiet pain of giving up her dream, the loneliness of living in a world where no one knew her secret. She didn't just play the music, and she spoke through it. Victor stood still. He had expected to hear a few clumsy notes and then send her away. But what he heard was something raw, real. The mistakes didn't bother him. He wasn't listening for perfection. He was listening for something deeper, and he found it. May's music reached into his heart, the same heart that had been closed for so long. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. When she finished, she kept her head down, afraid to look at him. She thought she had embarrassed herself. She was ready to say sorry and run from the room. But Victor didn't speak. He slowly walked toward the piano and sat down beside her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then in a low voice he asked, "Who taught you?" May looked at him, surprised. She told him about her village, the old upright piano, her uncle who played by ear, and the school teacher who let her practice after class. She told him about the music school she almost got into, and how her family couldn't afford it, and how since then she had played only in secret. Until now, Victor listened carefully. His eyes didn't move from her face. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You have something," he said. "Not training, not skill. Something else. Something most trained musicians lose." May didn't know what to say. Victor stood up and left the room without another word. She sat there for a few minutes, confused. Did he like it? Was he angry? Had she crossed a line? She had no idea that this moment, this quiet performance, had opened a locked door inside him, and that soon, everything would change. May couldn't sleep that night. The piano keys still echoed in her mind, not because of her performance, but because of Victor's reaction. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't said much at all. But his eyes, those tired, quiet eyes, had softened for a moment like he had seen a ghost from a memory. And then he had walked out. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, the tremble in her hands, the way her heartbeat raced as she played, and the feeling, yes, the strange feeling, that someone had finally heard her. The next day, the house felt different. Victor didn't stay in his room. Instead, he was already in the music room by the time May passed by. She peeked inside and saw him standing beside the piano looking at the sheet music. His hand hovered over the keys, but he didn't sit. He noticed her and, for the first time in weeks, called her name. "May." She stopped. "Yes, sir?" He looked at her carefully. "Play again." She froze. "Now?" He nodded. The same piece. From the second movement, her hands felt sweaty. She had played it only once before him, and that had been pure emotion. What if she messed up this time? What if yesterday had just been luck? But something in his voice wasn't demanding. It wasn't even like an order from a boss. It sounded more like a request. Maybe even hope. So she sat. This time she began a little more confidently. The second movement was slower, more emotional. It was full of pain and beauty, almost like a conversation between longing and peace. Pain and beauty, almost like a conversation between longing and peace. As she played, Victor moved quietly behind her. He didn't interrupt. He listened. Not like a teacher. Not like a critic. Like a man who hadn't heard music in a very long time and didn't want to miss a single note. When she finished, there was a long silence, then he spoke softly. "You don't play like a student." May turned to look at him. "I never finished school." "I don't mean that," he said. "Students play to impress. You play to speak." She didn't understand what he meant at first, but he continued, "Anna, my wife, but she played like that. She never cared about applause. She only cared about saying something real. That's what I hear in you." May lowered her eyes. "Thank you." Victor walked to the window. Would you like to practice here?" May looked up. "Practice?" he nodded. "Use the piano, play, learn." "I'm the maid, and I'm a man who hasn't touched the piano in months," he replied without smiling. "We both need music. You're not just cleaning this house anymore. You've woken something that I thought was dead." She didn't know what to say, but her heart said yes before her mouth did. From that day, everything changed. Each morning, May did her usual chores, but after lunch, she would quietly go to the music room, and Victor would meet her there. He didn't sit at the piano. He stood, watched, listened, corrected her gently when her timing slipped, encouraged her when her fingers hesitated, and slowly, he began to teach again, not like a master to a student, but like a man who remembered what it felt like to care about something again. They didn't talk much outside the music. Victor was still quiet. He didn't like questions. May didn't pry, but the room began to bloom with life again. The piano that had stayed silent for months now sang each day, and the house, once full of sorrow, began to feel lighter, room by room. Victor showed her pieces by Chopin, Debussy, and Schubert. Each one was a new world for May. She had only played what her village teacher knew, simple songs, old ballads, but now she was stepping into the great oceans of classical music. She wasn't perfect, but Victor didn't want perfection. "Emotion is more important than speed," he would say. "Play it like you mean it." Sometimes she would mess up and laugh nervously, and sometimes he would smile just a little, and sometimes he would close his eyes as she played, and it almost looked like he was remembering a moment he had loved and lost. One evening, after she had finished a piece, she turned to him and said, "Why are you helping me?" Victor looked at her for a long time. His voice was quiet when he answered, "Because you reminded me what music is. I forgot, after Anna. I thought it had died with her. But the way you played, it brought something back." May looked down. "I never thought anyone would hear me again." "You didn't need an audience," Victor said. "Your heart was already loud." For a moment, they just sat in the soft light of the piano room. Two souls from different worlds joined by one thing they both understood: music that spoke when words couldn't. May's fingers moved carefully across the piano keys, the soft notes dancing through the air like whispers. Outside, the sky was beginning to turn gold as the sun set behind the hills. Inside the music room, time felt still, like the world had paused to listen. Victor stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching her closely. "You're rushing the transition," he said. Gently, May stopped playing. "Sorry, don't be sorry. Just listen to the silence between the notes. Sometimes that's more important than the notes themselves." She nodded and tried again. Each day now followed this: rhythm, clean, eat, practice, play, learn. But it was more than just music. Something deeper was happening. The house no longer felt like a place of mourning. It was becoming a place of healing. And for Victor, each hour spent with May brought back a piece of himself that he thought had been lost forever. He still didn't play. Victor hadn't touched the piano keys himself. Not once. He gave guidance, pointed things out, corrected her posture, explained theory, but when she asked him to demonstrate, he always refused. "My time is done," he would say. But May didn't believe that. She could see it in his eyes, the way they followed the music, the way his fingers moved slightly when she played a familiar phrase, the way he closed his eyes at certain chords. His body remembered. His heart remembered. The music was still inside him. He just didn't know how to face it. One afternoon, Victor brought out an old dusty binder filled with handwritten sheets. "These are my compositions," he said. "Things Anna and I played together. Some are unpublished. Some unfinished." May flipped through the pages like she had found treasure. The notes looked more complicated than anything she had played so far, but also more beautiful. There were markings in the margins, little arrows, words like "soften here" or "pause for breath," and sometimes simply the word Anna. "These pieces are special," Victor said. "They were never meant for the world, just for us. May I try one?" May asked. He hesitated. For a moment, he almost said no, but then he nodded. She sat at the piano and began to play one of the pieces, slow, gentle, careful not to make mistakes. She was afraid to ruin something so personal, but as the music flowed, something happened. Victor walked toward the piano, and for the first time in months, quietly without a word, he sat beside her. He placed his hands on the lower half of the keyboard. May didn't stop. She watched him from the corner of her eye, surprised. Slowly, softly, he added a few notes beneath hers. Not many, just enough to deepen the sound. It was like two voices speaking at once. Hers, full of emotion and curiosity, and his, full of pain and wisdom. Together, they played. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't loud, but it was honest, raw, real. When the last note faded into silence, Victor stood up quickly, as if afraid of what he had just allowed himself to feel. "I have to go," he said, and left the room. May didn't follow. She knew not to. He had taken a step, a big one, and that was enough for now. Later that evening, Victor sat alone in his study. He poured himself a glass of wine but didn't drink it. Instead, he stared at the piano room from afar, thinking about the moment they had shared. He had played again, not for the world, not for a crowd, not for applause, but for himself, and for someone who reminded him that music still had something to say. The next day, May found a new piece of music on the piano stand, a short duet, one part written for a student, the other for a master. She looked around the room, but Victor wasn't there. Still, the message was clear. She sat down and began to play the student part. 2 minutes later, Victor walked in, nodded, and joined her. This became their new habit. Every few days they would play together, slowly, quietly, gently. No audience, just the sound of healing, and something else was changing too. Victor smiled more. May laughed without fear. The silence in the house had become something beautiful. A peaceful pause between songs, not the empty kind that comes from grief. Music was returning, not just to the piano but to their lives. The days were brighter now, even when the sky was gray. Even when the wind whistled through the trees outside Victor Halden's house, there was something warm inside. Music had returned, not as a performance, but as a quiet language between two souls who never expected to find each other. Every afternoon, May and Victor sat at the piano. Their lessons had turned into something else. They no longer followed a strict schedule. Sometimes they practiced difficult pieces. Sometimes they played simple melodies. Sometimes they just talked. Not much, just small things. But for Victor, even a few words felt like the opening of a door he had kept locked for too long. One day, as they finished a short duet, Victor leaned back and looked at May. "You feel the music more than most trained pianists," he said. May smiled shyly. "Maybe because I play with my heart, not just my hands." Victor nodded. "That's what makes it real." Then something unexpected happened. He stood up, walked to a drawer near the bookshelf, and pulled out a dusty envelope. Inside it was an invitation, old, yellowed at the edges. "This was sent to me 3 months ago," he said. "Before I canceled everything, the National Conservatory invited me to give a master class this winter. A small private recital, very formal." May looked up, curious. "Are you going?" "I wasn't," he said. "But now, I'm thinking of accepting, on one condition." She waited, unsure what he meant. "I want you to perform with me," he said quietly. The words hit her like a wave. "Me?" He nodded. "One piece, a duet. Just 5 minutes." May stared at him. "But I'm not ready. I've never played on a real stage. I'm not anyone. You're someone who has something to say through music, Victor said, and that's all that matters. She felt her heart beating fast. The idea of playing in front of people, professionals, musicians, critics, was terrifying. But something inside her also felt alive. Still, fear rose in her chest. What if I fail? Victor looked at her kindly. Then we fail together. But I promise you, your music will speak louder than any mistake. May didn't answer right away. She spent the night awake, lying in her small room, staring at the ceiling. Her whole life had been about staying quiet, invisible, small. She had been taught to work hard, not to dream too much. Dreams were for others. But music had always been her secret world. Now someone had opened that world again. Someone who believed in her. The next morning, she gave her answer. I'll do it, she said softly, but only if we play something you wrote. Victor smiled for the first time that week. I thought you might say that, he said. I've already started rewriting one of the pieces Anna and I used to. And now this. The hall was silent, not with boredom, but with awe. No one moved. No one coughed. Even the smallest breaths were quiet. The music wasn't perfect, but it was real, emotional, alive. Victor's part grew stronger, more expressive. He didn't overpower her. He lifted her, supported her, guided her. It was as if Anna's presence was there too, not in the music, but in the space between it, in the understanding they shared. As they reached the final passage, May's fingers danced. She was no longer a maid, no longer a girl afraid to dream. She was a pianist, a storyteller, a voice that had waited years to be heard. The final note faded into silence. May lifted her hands and let them rest in her lap. She didn't look up. Then applause. It began slowly, like people weren't sure if it was real. Then louder still. People stood. They clapped with their hands and their hearts, not for fame, not for spectacle, but for something that had moved them deeply. Victor stood and bowed. May slowly followed. Her eyes were wet, but she smiled. Not the shy smile she wore at the house, but a smile full of emotion. Of release. Backstage after the performance, a few guests tried to speak to Victor. A music professor approached May, stunned by her playing. But Victor gently pulled her away and led her into a quiet corner. Well, he said, how do you feel? May let out a shaky laugh. Like I'm dreaming. You're not, he said. You just reminded a room full of people what music is supposed to be. She looked at him. I was so scared. I was too, Victor admitted. But you didn't let it stop you. That's courage. They sat for a moment in the quiet. The snow continued to fall outside. For Victor, it was a full circle. He had once performed with the woman he loved. Now, after loss, silence, and pain, he had found someone else, and not to replace, but to help him remember that music, like life, never really ends, it just changes hands. Before they left, May turned to Victor. Thank you, she said. For everything, he shook his head. No, thank you. For reminding me how to feel again. And with that, they walked out into the snow. Two souls warmed not by applause, but by something far more rare. A shared song that only they could truly understand. The snow had melted. Spring arrived quietly, like soft footsteps on old wooden floors. Birds returned to the garden, and the trees outside Victor's house began to bloom. The house, once filled with silence and shadows, now held light, in the air, in the music, and in their hearts. After the performance, everything changed, not in a loud or dramatic way. But little by little, the world began to notice. The video of May and Victor's duet, secretly recorded by someone in the audience, found its way online. At first, only a few people watched, but then it spread, like something people didn't know they needed until they heard it. The comments were full of words like soulful, haunting, real, and who is she? People didn't just hear music. They felt something in it, journalists called. Conservatories reached out. A small article appeared in a music magazine calling May the hidden voice of emotion. Some thought she was Victor's student. Others guessed she was a child prodigy who had disappeared. No one could guess the truth. May, the maid May, the girl who used to play on an old village piano with missing keys. When Victor showed her the article, she didn't smile. She looked down and said, I don't want to be famous. Victor nodded. You won't be. Not unless you choose to be. That's the difference between noise and music. One demands attention, the other waits to be discovered. He had already turned down interview requests and offers to perform again. Are we done? May asked one day. Victor smiled faintly. No, we've only just begun. Their lessons continued. But now the music was different. Victor started sharing not just old pieces, but new ones. Songs he had been quietly writing since the concert. Some were soft, others bold. Each one was personal, written not for the public, but for someone who truly listened. You've inspired me, he told May. Not to play like before, but to play for the right reasons. May felt the same. For the first time in years. She played without fear. Her fingers no longer hesitated. Her heart no longer asked for permission. The piano had become her voice, her home, her way of saying everything she couldn't speak aloud. But along with the joy came something else. A letter arrived one morning. It was from a small music academy in the city. They had heard about May's performance and were offering her a scholarship. A full one. They wanted her to study, to grow, to perform. May read the letter 3 times. Her hands trembled. She carried it to Victor, who sat in the garden with a cup of tea. He read it in silence. Then he looked up and asked one simple question. What do you want to do? May didn't know how to answer. For so long her dream had been impossible. Music school? Stages? Lessons? It had never been for someone like her. She had always thought her place was in the background, sweeping, cleaning, serving. Not standing under lights with eyes watching her every move. But you're not that girl anymore, Victor said gently. You never were, actually. You just believed it. May stared at the letter. I'm scared, he nodded. Good, that means it matters. She looked at him with tearful eyes. If I go, I'll have to leave this house. Victor's face stayed calm, but there was sadness in his eyes. Yes, and that's how it should be. A teacher's joy isn't in keeping a student close, it's in seeing them grow. May felt her chest tighten. I don't want to leave you, he smiled. You're not leaving me. You're continuing the music. That's all I've ever wanted. That evening, they played one last duet in the music room. Just the two of them. No audience. No cameras. Just a quiet farewell between a teacher and a student. And 2 people who had healed each other in ways they never expected. The song they played was one Victor had written just for that moment. It was called The Maid's Voice. The opening melody was soft, like the sound of footsteps in an empty hallway. Then it rose into something strong and full, almost like wings opening. The ending faded into silence with a single high note that seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. After the final note, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The music had said everything. Years had passed. The house stood quietly on the hill just as it always had. The garden still bloomed each spring. The piano still stood in the music room, polished and waiting. But everything inside had changed, not in its furniture but in its spirit. Victor Halden was older now. His hair was more silver than gray. He walked a bit slower and his hands sometimes trembled. But his eyes were brighter than they had been in years, not because of concerts or applause, but because of something deeper. Something remembered. He still played, not every day, not always in full, but sometimes in the soft light of the morning, the sound of the piano would float out into the halls again. Gentle, thoughtful, emotional, not for anyone else, just for himself. And sometimes for her. May had gone to the city. She took the scholarship. She studied with care, humility, and hunger. She didn't chase fame. She didn't chase perfection. She chased truth in sound and silence and feeling. Her professors were stunned by her. Not because she was flawless, but because she was honest in a way they rarely saw. She played like someone who had lived, and the world began to notice. She gave small performances at first, student recitals, charity events, music halls. Word spread, not fast like lightning, but slow and steady like rising sun. People didn't just hear her, they felt her. Every time she touched the keys, something unspoken came through. One journalist wrote, "She doesn't play like she wants to impress you. She plays like she wants to reach something inside you that you forgot was there." And through it all, she wrote to Victor, letters filled with music talk, city noise, school stress, joy, fear, and little moments of discovery. He wrote back less often, but when he did, his words were full of pride. Then one day an invitation arrived, May had been asked to perform at a major music festival. A solo performance, her first, on one of the largest stages in the country. She was nervous, of course, but more than anything she wanted Victor to be there. She sent him a letter. "If you can come, please come. I want you to hear the piece we finished together. The maid's voice, I'm playing it for you." The night of the concert arrived. The hall was full. Lights dimmed. Cameras were ready. The host introduced her as a rising star with a soul far older than her age. But May didn't think about any of that. She walked onto the stage like she did that first night with Victor, quietly, with calm hands and a fast-beating heart. And in the third row, sitting quietly, was Victor. He hadn't told her he was coming. He wore the same black coat he always wore. His eyes glistened with quiet pride as he watched her bow before the audience. No one around him knew who he was, just an old man in the crowd. And that was fine. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to listen. May sat at the piano. She closed her eyes, and then she played. The melody began, soft and slow. The same piece they had once played in the music room, but now it was deeper, stronger, more her. Each note told a story, of dust and dreams, of silence and sound, of two people from different worlds finding each other through music. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. She played for the man in the third row, and as the final high note floated through the hall, May lifted her hands from the keys. Silence, silence, then thunderous applause. People stood. They clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Cameras flashed, but May didn't bow yet. She looked into the audience, her eyes searching, and there he was. Victor stood slowly, meeting her eyes. He didn't clap. He just smiled, a soft, proud smile, and placed his hand over his heart. May bowed deeply, not to the crowd, to him. The next morning, Victor left early. He didn't go backstage. He didn't wait for photographs. He just walked quietly into the city and disappeared into the morning light. But May would never forget. She would carry that moment, and all the moments before it, in every song she played for the rest of her life. Because she was no longer just the maid. She was the girl whose music had spoken and been heard.